In this video, we're going to cover some more advanced Postman features that's going to make it a bit easier to use this tool, especially as the number of requests we're working with continues to grow. So we're going to take a quick break from writing code in Visual Studio Code, and we'll focus on improving our Postman workflow, making it a bit easier to test out the requests that our API supports. And to get started, what I want to talk about are Postman environments and Postman environment variables. To illustrate how environments are going to play a role in Postman, let's start off with an example. So right now, all of our requests are being made to localhost 3000, and that's good because it's where our server is running. Later on in the class, though, we're also going to deploy the Task Manager API to Heroku, and in that case, we'll have a different URL. We're also going to want to test those production endpoints from Postman, and that would mean us manually swapping out URLs for a dozen or so different requests. I would have to go into each and change the URL back and forth as I wanted to change which server I was making the request to. With Postman environments, we can set up an environment with various variables. These can be used to configure how Postman runs, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to do it for URLs, and we're also going to do it for our authentication tokens. Let's get things started with a very basic example, though. We're going to focus on that create user endpoint. We'll end up working down this list. And the create user endpoint, like all of them, has the URL hard-coded. We're going to address that. Now up above in the top right-hand side, we can see this no environment dropdown. If I expand it, we don't have any environments to pick from, but we can go ahead and create our very first one. Right here, I'll go ahead and set up an environment by clicking that gear icon, which opens the Manage Environments panel. Now, once again, we don't have any. I can click Add to create the first one, and right here, we'll pick a name. I'll go ahead and use Task Manager API followed by dev. So this will be the Task Manager API running in development mode. So all of the environment variables will be for that, where the URL would be localhost 3000. Down below, we can set up key value pairs for the various environment variables we want to create. For example, I could create one called URL, and I could set the value equal to localhost 3000. Let's take a quick moment to knock that out. Now we have initial value, which is what we set, and then we have the current value, so it could get changed later on, although in the case of URL, it'll never get changed. So right here, we can now click Add to create our brand new environment, and we could always go ahead and create another. Let's take a quick moment to do that as well. Right here, I can call this one Task Manager API, then in parentheses prod, which is short for production. Now, I don't know what the production URL is, so I'll leave that blank for now, though I will create the environment as a placeholder. Down below, I'll click Add, and now we have two environments to pick from. If I close the environment's modal pop-up, I can go back to that no environment dropdown, and I can see my two options. So I can click over to this one to start running requests on the dev server, and I can click over to this one to start running requests on the production server. Now let's go ahead and actually figure out how to use that URL variable we set up. So I'm going to switch back over to the dev environment, and we're going to adjust the URL we have right here. All we're going to do is take localhost 3000 and remove it. We're still going to leave the /users, as that part, the path, will change for every request. Right here, to use an environment variable's value, we start by opening and closing two sets of curly braces. Then we name the environment variable we're trying to use. In this case, it's URL. Now with this in place, when we make the request, the URL value will be used and the dev environment has that defined. If I actually hover over that little part, I can see the value that's going to be used, which is fantastic. And if I go ahead and send this off, it's actually going to work as expected. I'll click Save first, then Send, and what do I get? down below, it's actually able to communicate with the server correctly, even though that email is already taken. Now, if we were to switch over to the production environment, all our requests would fail because there's no URL defined, and that's okay for now. From here, let's go ahead and work down the list, making sure we use the URL environment variable. So I have login, I'll go ahead and update that, and then I'll go ahead and save things. Next up in the list, we have create task. I'll make sure to use the environment variable there and save it. We have read profile. After that, we have read user. From there, we have read tasks. Next up, we have read task individual. Then we have the ability to update a user. We're going to swap out the value there, and just 3 more left. Update task. And then we move on to our delete endpoints. I have delete user, and I have delete task. Now, if you thought that was annoying, you're right. And that's the whole reason we're setting up these environment variables. Yes, we had to do it once, but it's done. And now, when we want to swap out the URL in the future, we'll never need to manually do that again. We can change the environment variable a single time or switch between environments to have all of our requests automatically update. So that's the first thing I wanted to accomplish in this video. The next one is a little more complex and also a little more useful, and it has to do with how we're setting up authentication. So over here, read profile is currently the only request that actually has authentication set up, and to authenticate, it's providing the token as part of a header. Now we can continue to do that, but there are better ways to get the job done. If I fire this off, yes, it works, but now if I wanted to add authentication to my other requests, it would fail. Let's go ahead and talk about how we can update multiple requests to all use the same authentication scheme. So right here, we're going to grab that token value. We're not going to grab the space or the bearer keyword. We just want the JWT, and we're going to go ahead and delete this header completely. Now, this is going to cause the request to fail, which is okay. We're not authenticated, and that's expected. What we're going to do from here is head over to the authorization tab. This provides us with a different way to set up authorization, and it's only different in terms of the user interface. In the end of the day, the exact same request is getting sent from Postman to the Express server. From this type dropdown, we're going to switch it up to the following, which is bearer token. That's the strategy we're using, where we provide the authentication token. And then we can go ahead and paste that right in here. This is just a different way to get done exactly what we were getting done before. I go ahead and save the request, I fire it off, and now we're back to a working app. Now this does indeed work, but once again, it's only working for this specific request. So this is not the approach we're going to take. What we're going to do is switch the type back to the type we had before, which is inherit auth from parent. This allows us to define our authentication scheme once and use it in every single request that has this type under authorization. And it's the default type, which means all of them. To actually get this done, all we have to do is take our authentication token over to the following menu. For the task collection, we'll click that drop-down menu. From here, we're going to go to Edit. And from Edit, we're going over to the Authorization tab. Now, this is exactly what we just saw before, but instead of setting up authorization for a single request, we're setting it up for every single request in this collection. Right here, we're going to switch from no auth to bearer token, and we're going to provide that token value. I'm going to update the collection, and with that in place, any request that has authorization set to inherit is going to be able to authenticate without needing to do anything manually. So right here, I can send this off, and what do I get? I'm still authenticated, even though it's not set up anywhere in the individual request. I can see under header it's showing up a little bit, but this is just showing up because it's giving us a preview of that collection header we had set before. So now that we have this in place, all of our requests are going to be authenticated, but we can still customize things further. We know that create user and login user don't require authentication. even though their authorization value is inherent by default. We can always switch that up to no auth to disable authentication for both of those. I'll go ahead and disable it for create user and save it. And I'll do the exact same thing for login, updating authorization over to no auth. Now for all of the other requests, as an example, update user, that's already the authorization value. So all of our requests are inheriting from the auth parent, so they're getting that token set correctly, except for sign up and login, and that is exactly what we want. Now there's just one more thing we're going to do to take this to the next level, and this is going to require us to set up a little bit of JavaScript code to perform some automation. So what's the one manual part of this workflow? The manual part is either creating a user and logging in, then getting that auth token, going back over to that menu to update the value, and then being able to make the requests. We can have all of that done automatically for us by writing just 3 or 4 lines of JavaScript code. Now, all the code we're going to write is going to live in the following menu for both create user and login user. It is the tests menu. So we have pre-request script where we can add some JavaScript code to run before the request is sent off. In this case, before the login request is sent off. We also have tests. Now this runs after the response is received, and in here, we can write some JavaScript code to extract that token property on the body and set an environment variable whose value is equal to that token. From there, we'll use the environment variable inside of the collection to get everything working as expected. So let's start by editing our collection just one more time. Right here, under authorization, no longer are we actually going to list out a JSON Web Token. Instead, we're going to reference an environment variable. We'll call this auth token. Now it currently doesn't exist, but we're about to write some code to set it. So I will update the collection, and we're going to start in the tests tab for the login user request. Right here, the first thing we want to do is make sure that the request succeeded. We want to make sure we got a 200 status code. We can use an if condition to check that. Right here, if, and Postman gives us access to an object, PM, we can use when we're writing our little pre-request script or test code. In this case, we can use something on PM to get the status code. It is PM, which is short for Postman, .response, .code. This is a number, and we're going to check and see if it's 200. If it is 200, we'll run the code that actually sets the environment variable. Now in this case, PM contains another thing we can use to set the environment variable, that is PM.environment. PM.environment contains a method set, and we can use this to set the value for an environment variable in our current environment. So we have a key value pair where both are strings. We have the environment variable name we're trying to set. We just called that auth token before. And then we have the value we're trying to use. Now in this case, we know the value, it lives on that response body. So down below, we have the response for one of our previous requests. Here's the body, and at the very bottom, we have that token property. This is the value that we need to get, but we need to get it from our test script. So right here, instead of passing in a string like we were doing previously, we're going to go ahead and grab the code from somewhere else. We're going to access something else on PM. It is pm.response.json. This is going to take the JSON response and convert it to an object, and the object is the return value. So on this object, the only thing we need access to is token. So .token. And there we go. Now we have a script that's going to set the authentication token automatically anytime we log in. So if our token expires, I can run login a single time, then I can go to any of the other requests to run them and make sure things are working as expected. Let's go ahead and test this out. I'm going to move over to read profile, and I'm going to run this request before I ever run login. When I do, I'm not authorized, which is expected. Now I run login, which should automatically set that token for me. The login request finished, and I'll head back over to read profile. This time it should work. I'll fire it off for a second time, and it does indeed work, which is fantastic. Now, the last thing we're going to do is take our code in this tests tab, and we're going to bring it up to create user. Right here, we'll go over to the tests tab again. I'll paste the exact same code in, and the only thing I'm going to do is change the status code we're looking for. When we create a user, we get a 201 back when things work well, so we can save that, and now we're done. So now we have a completely automated system. Yes, we have to log in once, but everything else is handled behind the scenes for us. No longer are we going to have to copy and paste values around or manually change URLs. This is going to make it a lot easier to continue to use Postman, especially as we set up authentication for the other endpoints that our API supports. Let's take a quick moment to head back over to that gear, go back to the dev environment by clicking on it, and here we can see that URL has the same value as before, and auth token has the current value equal to this what we're seeing over here, the JWT. There's no initial value because we never manually typed anything in here, and that's fine. There is no default auth token we would want. It should get set as the response from either signing up or logging in. So let's take a quick moment to recap because we covered quite a bit. In this video, we started by creating Postman environments. An environment is nothing more than a name for your environment and a key value pair of values you can access when working in that environment. So in this case, under the dev environment for the Task Manager API, we have URL and we have token. If I go back to the menu and go over to prod, we have nothing, and that's okay. We'll focus on setting that up later. Now, once we have our environments in place, we can switch between them via the menu up top, and we can access those environment variables from anywhere, such as the URL right here, or such as the collections edit page, where we set up authentication for every single request in the collection, except for signing up or logging in. Now, if you have any questions about what was covered here, or you're not clear on why we're doing something, just crack open a new question in the Q&A. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next lesson where we get back to Visual Studio Code and we continue to build out the API. Let's go ahead and jump right in.